Well, welcome to episode 2 of our podcast, At Home with the Hugheses. This is our little podcast experiment.
Exciting.
It is exciting. And just a reminder, the vision of this podcast is really to share some of our life lessons, our journey through leading a church, raising kids, being married. And we just felt like it would be quite fun to share some of what we've learnt, the good, the bad and the ugly. And our hope is that it will be an encouragement to you. You may then not make some of the mistakes that we have made, the many that we have. Our hope is just that it's helpful.
Yes.
And so we want to zoom in this week. Each week we're going to kind of look at a particular topic, aren't we?
Yep.
Something that's pertinent to us, something that's been significant in our journey. So we want to talk specifically about calling. And calling is one of those words that's sort of a little bit nebulous, isn't it?
Oof,
oh, I know.
word.
Oh, straight in there.
Nebulous.
I think what I mean by that, because obviously you know what that word means.
Oh, yes.
You love it when I condescend you. Do you know what condescend means?
Yeah.
Oh, just checking. Basically, it's slippery. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a word that we talk about a lot in church life.
What does it actually mean?
What does it mean? And essentially it means finding the thing or things. Let's debunk that one. It's not always one thing. The thing that that brings you alive, that at the same time enables you to kind of make a contribution to the kingdom of God, to human flourishing. And so
the thing you were put on earth.
Oh, that's better.
To do.
Your raison d'etre.
Yes.
Bit of French.
Gosh.
I know. Gosh, she's pouring out.
Latin pouring out.
Was that, no,
Carpe diem.
Raison d'etre. I thought it was French, not Latin.
I said French.
You
I
said
next
Latin.
you'll be doing Latin.
Oh, Latin. Oh, I see.
You
Just
listen to
checking,
me, but
just
you don't.
checking, you know, your languages.
Well, in terms of calling, because I get asked that a lot from younger people, particularly, how do you know what you're called to? I've found it helpful to ask 3 questions.
Of course, it's 3 questions.
3 questions I would always ask myself when it comes to calling is, number 1, what are you passionate about? Number 2, what gifts do people recognize in you? And number 3, what opportunities are opening up before you?
That's good.
So for me, growing up, I was passionate about leading worship. I would spend hours in my room learning songs. Back then it was the old Delirious, Matt Redman, Graham Kendrick, Vineyard. I'd spend hours and hours and hours worshiping in my room with these songs, and then got to the point where I wanted to write my own songs, articulate my own language, my own melodies in worship. So that was a massive passion for me. But then secondly, what happened is people began to see that passion.
They affirmed it, didn't they?
They affirmed it and began to, recognize a potential gift and call. There was a guy who amazingly is now part of our church at Gas Street, a guy called Nick Harding, who he was a medical student, but he was leading worship at my parents' church. And I think he could see just wild enthusiasm, not much gift, not much talent, but could see enthusiasm. And so he got behind this, passion and enthusiasm and began to give me opportunities. But then what happened is other people began to say,
validate.
Validate. We love it when you lead worship, or you should invest in this. And then more and more opportunities began to open up.
Isn't it true though that when you first started playing in the worship band, you discovered that actually the volume was like down?
So I was there. I'd play backing guitar, backing vocals.
How old would you have been then?
I'd been 16.
Okay.
And I literally thought I was the kind of rainmaker.
You're bringing it,
I was bringing it. That even though I wasn't the front man, as it were, or woman, my backing vocals, my backing guitar was like
it's changing the atmosphere.
Anointed, unbelievable.
And I was very confident. Wait,
exactly,
actually, not true.
Oh,
not
no,
true.
I wasn't. But and then I was asked to go and send a message to the sound engineer. Went to the back and I looked at the desk and I could see my vocals and my guitar were actually on mute. They weren't even coming through. I'd been playing my heart out. Wasn't even coming through.
But did that discourage you?
No, because I thought actually this is amazing learning. I was growing in confidence. And I think I was probably relaxed and open. I remember also at a young age, probably around that time, 16, 17, I made a vow before the Lord. And I'm not saying this is what you should do, but this is what I did, that I will never ask to lead anything, because I wanted to know that if God, you're calling me to do this, that you'll open up the doors. And so even to this day, I've never once asked to lead worship at an event or a conference. And so when these doors opened up and I was asked to lead a youth weekend away, asked to lead at New Wine, at Soul Survivor, at different conferences around the world, I could walk confidently through these doors because I felt, God, you've opened them up for me. And maybe that's partly my personality. Some people are much more intentional, others are more reactive. I think I'm probably a bit more reactive. But I look now, and that's helped me to feel a real confidence in this call, because the things that I've got to do, I just couldn't have initiated them in my own strength. And so I think as people consider calling, I think, what are you passionate about? What are the opportunities that are opening up? And are people affirming you? I was desperate to be a Premiership footballer, had a massive passion for it, but there was no
one was knocking at your door.
And no one was affirming that call. And maybe all that's a bit too simplified.
Do you mean Alex Ferguson didn't pick up the phone?
But very good football knowledge.
I was secretly impressed with myself. Well, you did give me a football
Who does he manage
shirt
now?
last week.
Who does Alex Ferguson manage now?
Is he still alive? I don't know.
He's retired. Anyway.
He's retired.
But what about...
So was that a trick question?
It was a trick question. But
well,
you
there you
answered.
go.
So I think in some ways for me, there was quite clear calling from a young age, and then things have grown and developed. But I think actually all my calling, even through church leadership and preaching or other things, is through the lens of worship. But say for you, it's been maybe a different journey. It hasn't been quite as clear cut from perhaps such a young age.
And I think it's important. I think the opportunity thing is important. Maybe we'll come on to it in a moment. That I agree with you, and actually that vow that you made not to ever push yourself forward as such, not to sort of create opportunity. That's something that I've also lived by, probably learnt from you, I will reluctantly admit, as a good, I guess that sense of, if God opens the doors, it's on him to sort of sustain it. If I know I've pushed open the doors, then it's on me to sort of sustain it. And I think that's a really good, sorry, I was only halfway through my point. But I think opportunity is also, there's some nuance around that, because people can potentially be in churches or in businesses where there could be prejudice at play. And those opportunities, there isn't an equality when it comes to opportunity. Whereas you were in a place, an environment where that opportunity, there was no kind of glass ceiling for you in terms of, apart from perhaps your own ability at the beginning.
But if I can say my point, because I know where you're going with this.
No, but I don't want to jump ahead. Okay.
No, but this is really important. And I think we should go there straight away. But in terms of whilst even waiting for bigger opportunities to open up, the sort of, I guess, how intentional I work really hard at my craft of guitar, singing, learning songs. I knew so many songs off by heart. So I wasn't just kind of, I wasn't lacking intentionality. I guess that's what I'm saying. I wasn't, putting my CV out there begging to lead, but I was working really hard behind the scenes.
And that's the important thing, isn't it?
And so I think for some people, the opportunity might not have fully opened itself up. But there's a moment where you need to be doing the hard graft behind the scenes. And it's a hard thing, the timing. And I know people who feel called to things, who are out working, being faithful, hoping that God's going to open up the doors. But in the physical, here and now, those doors aren't opening up. So you then ask, is there a calling there? Or
you have to, and that's the brutal question that you have to ask, isn't it? Are those opportunities not opening up because I'm in an environment where there are glass ceilings that are essentially operating against God's call on my life. And maybe the harsh reality is you got to move to a different environment. Could be. I don't say that lightly.
No.
Or it could be that actually that's not what you're called to in this season. And I think we should talk about seasons, because I think calling and seasons work really hand in hand. But the thing I was also going to say around opportunity and sort of the secret place, the hidden place, I know in our journey of sort of being leaders, there are people that have come to us and said, I want to preach, or I want to do youth work, or I want to do this. And actually, like worship leading would be a good example. And then on Sunday, and let's just be clear, you can't always judge a person's devotional life by how high they lift their hands on a Sunday. So I just want to caveat this point by saying that. But if when they're leading worship, it's all, hands in the air, shabba dabba dabba.
We just don't care.
But then actually they don't rock up to church, or they're sort of sitting in the back, just get a serving. Yeah. Then again, it's like, calling works through the whole of your life. It's not just when people are watching. You know, it's a passion that you carry when nobody's looking, in the secret place. And that was certainly true for you.
Yeah, well, my favourite quote on leading worship is, and I think you can apply this to, worship leading is taking your private cry and making it public. And it's that thing of integrity. What are you investing in behind the scenes? What are you praying for? What are you reading about? What are you growing in? It doesn't just happen when you step up to the microphone, and you could take that with any different
preaching
but you were touching upon the point, I think, around I was very blessed, probably growing up at a time where
privileged might be another word.
Where men a lot of male leaders would naturally identify with younger males and invest and encourage.
Which is brilliant.
Yes. And so I've had a huge number of amazing leaders invest in me. Yeah. I've had the opportunity to get to know them, serve alongside them, learn from them. But maybe for you as a woman, those opportunities have been much fewer. Yeah. If at all,
sometimes,
Yes, which has been in many ways, it's a massive disadvantage.
Yeah, and I think that's my point about opportunity. Yeah. Those 3 points are brilliant, darling. I love those. So helpful. But I think opportunity, there isn't always an equality of opportunity. It's important to note that. Yes. But I'd say, maybe going back even slightly further, that would be a distinction of our journey into calling around opportunity and investment and validation. I think let's go there in a moment. But I think going back even further, there was a key distinction for us, is that you knew what you were called to from a really young age.
Which is actually quite rare.
I think that, and I think we've got to acknowledge that, that again, if you're listening to this and you're in your late teens or can you imagine if people in their late teens are listening to this? No. There might be. That would be awesome. But 20s and 30s. 20s.
I meet so many people in their 30s who still don't quite know.
Yeah, and I think it can be really unhelpful sometimes to fixate on finding this one thing that you're called to. And I would say, in fact, I was chatting to a good friend of ours who's in her 20s, and I keep saying this to her, that the journey for me, my 20s in terms of calling, was more like a patchwork quilt. It wasn't like this straight line, like A to B to C to D. Yeah. It was these different things. Like I worked in TV for a bit, then I worked in PR for a bit for a church. Then I worked at HTV, worked in the creativity department. Then I had children. I was on maternity leave for a number of years.
That's a calling.
That
is it? Yeah.
Oh. Wowzers.
Well,
yes.
Fathering,
yes. But oh gosh, wow, that's thrown me off. We'll pick that one up when we really are at home with the Hugheses. But seasons are really important, because for me, that leadership journey, it was a bit more varied. Because I spent that time working in TV, was I not... did I get that wrong? Was I actually not called to TV? I think, no, I was, but it was a short season. And God used some of what I learned in that season for future seasons.
Well, if I can suggest...
Jump in.
No, but I think you have a gift and a calling of communication. You articulate, you're passionate, you write well, you preach well. But I think that whole season in TV at the BBC was part of that. Again, calling, how do you communicate things well? How do you, the whole mechanics behind TV shows and engaging with public and communicating ideas. So none of that was wasted. And yes, maybe your dream was to be a Blue Peter presenter. And maybe sadly that ship has sailed.
Yeah, sadly.
But
shout out to Simon Thomas, who is now a friend of ours. Yes.
But you what you're doing now is communicating, but it's in a different sphere.
Absolutely. And truth is, I don't think I had the depth of character or the emotional resilience at that time because the TV industry can be tough.
I think you do.
Oh, that's kind. Well, maybe not back then.
But you have to trust God
that it was a season. That
they didn't come begging you to present Blue Peter or Love Island or whatever you want.
Yeah, no, not that one. But in answer sort of to the question around those three things, I realize, yes, what I'm passionate about is communicating. Yeah. And I'm also passionate about seeing people come to faith. That's a big, and I realized that I'm passionate about vulnerable children. That's another area. And what's developed in me is this passion to see women raised up, partly off the back of my own experiences.
I mean, I'd love for you to dig into that. But I think you've listed.
I know it's quite a few, isn't it?
There. But I think actually what you carry.
Oh, I feel like we're in. Is this?
I know.
Like
it's all coming to me. It's very clear. Your whole next 20 years.
It's like a coaching session.
Yeah, it's like a support role for me to. No, I'm joking.
That's Tim's secret dream.
Yes.
Yeah.
Steak and chips when I get home. No. But you've got, I think, a gift and a call to empower people.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's what I think.
That's how you see it.
You're a visionary. He's all about seeing people empowered. So in one area, it's vulnerable children. Seeing vulnerable children being held back, experience hardship, loneliness, abuse, breaks your heart because you deep down believe that every child should be released and free and empowered. Women is a massive one because you hate the injustice that women have historically been suppressed and held back and
still are in many different ways in many different contexts.
Massive improvements, but the danger is we think, tick box, all sorted. But no, but that's to see women empowered. You're not passionate about running all women ministries. It's to see women.
It's a vehicle.
It's a vehicle. So I think that empowerment, again, I'd say maybe a word over you.
Oh gosh, it's not like a prophetic session.
But your freedom, isn't it? That's what you long for. Sometimes when I hear you scream in prayer. Freedoms, I think that's what you carry. Calling to see people free.
I think that's another important thing, is that maybe we can get fixated on the vehicle.
Yes.
When actually the calling is something deeper and can have multiple vehicles. And maybe that's what I mean about seasons, is that when I spent 7 years at home as a full-time mum. I mean, every mum is full-time.
Yes.
But I was at home.
I
stopped out of paid employment. I mean, I still ministered in loads of different ways. I had an amazing community.
You never stopped ministering.
Never stopped.
Parenting is a calling.
But not just to my children. Yeah. Yes. So I was ministering to my children, but I was also ministering in my local community, in church as a volunteer. I set up this ministry that was around mothers, particularly being able to connect with God and connect with each other and connect with their local community. So even though I wasn't paid, there was still such a strong sense of call in it. But it was a very different season. It was a very hidden season. Yeah. It's a season where there's very little immediate reward. It's a season where there's very little acknowledgement or validation. And I think it's quite a misunderstood season when you're at home with small children, because honestly, there is still this perception that you've sort of completely lost your brain, or you've lost any sense of wanting to look beyond the home. Does that make sense? And so at the time there was a lot of frustration, that, but I also very much knew I was called to be at home. But now I look back and I realize, I think I probably felt, in terms of calling, I felt like I was on hold some of the time, that I knew I had these, I think, godly aspirations to be in leadership, to teach, and to pursue things that God had put on my heart that just weren't compatible with being at home all the time. And now I recognize that that was a specific season that had these limitations around it.
Yeah.
I couldn't just, jump on an aeroplane and do this. I couldn't just do that because I knew that my role was to be at home with my children at that point. Now, again, everybody's journey looks different when it comes to parenting and raising children. But I now realize that I wasn't on hold, that God was doing a deep work in me, a deep work in my kids, that there was stuff I was learning. I mean, anyone who is at home full-time with small children will know that, my goodness, you have to dig extraordinarily deep. There's a lot of self-reflection that's required. There is a lot of absorbing. We talked a bit about that last week. There's in terms of patience, grace, negotiation, gosh, it stretches you beyond anything else that I've ever done. And I realize now that has set me up for some of the stuff that I'm called to now. So I guess that's one thing around calling.
Do you remember this guy, Jim, who sometimes sort of speaks into our lives? But we were the start of Gas Street. There was some challenges and tensions, weren't there? Because practically you'd been predominantly at home with the kids, and I'd been doing church ministry
and training for ordination.
So I was preaching a lot. I was in meetings on church leadership structures. How do we move forward? How do we reach unchurched? I was getting loads of experience, talking about it all the time. And so in some ways, humanly speaking, I was having a massive head start over you in terms of the practicalities of just being up front, leading a meeting.
And people investing in you. That was the other thing. Yeah.
And so I think you sometimes felt like you were massively behind in those, again, leading meetings. But then this guy, Jim, said, and I'll never forget it, but that actually you had a training in life, character formation, what it is to sit in frustration, to be faithful, to love, to serve. Actually, there are lessons and gold in your journey of the last 7 to 10 years that I just hadn't had.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, your connection and gut feeling and reading of people was in many ways actually sharper than me.
Interesting.
And I think the danger is, again, sometimes you can be doing all this church activity, but actually the sort of character formation of death to self, not my will, but yours be done. I mean, I do think sort of parenting is one of the...
Oh, it's a death to self, for sure.
So I think there was actually, and then I think when we could see that and embrace that actually, so when we were deciding how to do things at Gas Street Church, this is how we do it. And you'd be asking, well, why should we do it that way? Well, that's what we always do. And then, and it would annoy me at first, but actually I think you had insights and a way of doing things.
And you hid that annoyance so well.
And a reading of people that I actually needed to learn from you. So in some ways, those years, again, with God, this is what I love about calling and our faith in Christ. Nothing's wasted.
Nothing's wasted.
No broken moment, no pain, no hiddenness. In fact, it's all used to sharpen what we're called to do.
I think as well it'd be worth then talking about being a woman called to church leadership, because I think that is another distinction. If one of the distinctions is that our journey has looked different. Yours has been much more linear. Mine has been much more, varied. The other distinction is around being a woman called into leadership in the church and being a man. And I think opportunity and validation is a key part of that distinction. And they're two of your three brilliant little, what would you call those? Signposts. Signposts. Let's go with signposts. And I think, again, when I began to recognize, or we began to recognize that there was a call on me into church leadership, we began to recognize that if God did open up the doors for us to start our own church, that we would want to do that alongside one another in partnership, in equality. That we had so many chats, didn't we, in London around the kitchen table, quite, intense chats. Essentially like, look, if we can both acknowledge and validate one another's calling to church leadership, we're going to have to make it work.
Yeah.
We're going to, in the practical, we're going to have to make it practically work for us both to be released into leadership. Knowing that would look slightly different. Although for us, there is quite a lot of crossover, isn't there, in the things that we're strong on as leaders. Obviously distinctions. But I think what the shock for me when I first sort of stepped behind the curtain of church, if you like, was, and this is so naive actually, was that as a woman, there were big parts of the church, key leaders that I had looked up to and respected, that didn't believe on theological grounds that women were able to lead, or not able necessarily, but although interesting,
biblically
qualified to lead or to teach. That was such a shock to me. I realize how naive that sounds now. And yet at the same time, I just knew God was calling me to use this gift of communication in a church context to lead. I mean, it was just, again, if you're a leader, you just lead. It's not something that you switch on or switch off, is it? Yeah. And so that was a long journey. And I guess part of doing that alongside you was recognizing that you'd had all this investment from older male leaders that I hadn't had. Now, there were certain male leaders that gave me opportunity, for sure. But there was a lot then, and some of this is wisdom, but not all of it. There was a lot around this, what was called the Billy Graham principle, where Billy Graham basically refused to be on his own with any woman other than his wife. And it was all from a place of real nobility and honor, and I get that. But what it meant is...
only men are going to get invested in.
Only men
intentionally.
Are going to... Exactly. So there's a problem there. Yeah. And it's a bit of a conundrum to figure out, because... you know, we don't want to create scenarios where we're putting each other in temptation's way. But I really missed out. There weren't loads of women that were leading that were sort of above, you know, more experienced, as it were, you know, had gone ahead. And so I was sort of bereft in that. And so it meant that when I was stepping into leadership or stepping into preaching, for example, it wasn't from this foundation of validation. So you've had for years this sense of knowing that there are those that have gone before you that said, we see the call, I see the call on your life. You get up there, you can fail, you can fall on your backside, you can get things wrong, but don't worry, because I see the call on your life, that sort of cushion of validation. I never had that. So that for me, every time I got up to lead or preach, it felt like a pass or fail scenario, which was actually ultimately very shame-inducing for me, which ultimately would want me to just not do it anymore. But I'm a bit stubborn, so I just kept pushing through.
You know, I'm so proud. You've been unbelievably courageous and tenacious,
kind.
I think, in going after that. And, you know, there are other women who the same, who've really pioneered the way.
Alongside each other, actually.
Yeah, and I think things are changing. But just quickly, you talk about sort of why you passionately believe there are no ceilings over women and... you know, the Garden of Eden blueprint that actually we need to lead together, male and female, both made in the image of God. Just give us a 1 minute, like, why that's important.
Well, I mean, there obviously people need to do their own theological work. Anyone listening who has a question mark around whether women are called to teach or to lead in the church context, I would just say, do the work. You know, go and study brilliant theologians who have built, I think, a watertight case for it to be right. But I think, first of all, you look at the Garden of Eden, and the blueprint, the Eden blueprint is subdue the earth, you know, lead together. There's an equal mandate on male and female, Adam and Eve, to leadership over the earth.
Well, Eve is called Adam's helper, but that word helper is the word used for God.
Yeah, it's not a subordinate role. And I think that's where again, anyone that has sort of even a hint of misogynistic or sexist ideology in them, it's convenient to interpret that role, the role of the woman, as subordinate. But it's not. It
No.
was never intended to be. Ezer is, again, as you said, it's often the word used to describe, actually often the Holy Spirit, the helper. It's not a subordination. It's an equal role. And the equal mandate is lead, subdue the earth, go and rule over this earth that I've given you responsibility for. And then, of course, the fall happens, the curse comes in, and an aspect of the curse is that women would be in subordination to men. That's the curse.
Yeah.
And what's happened is we've made that the blueprint.
Yeah.
We've thought that was the plan, but no, the blueprint was always equal leadership.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there are all these examples through the Old Testament of patriarchy, I would say at its worst, interpreted potentially as blueprint theology. It's like, no, that's not what God is saying. Then, of course, Jesus arrives on earth, the living, breathing embodiment, God in human flesh. And what does he do? He radically empowers women.
Yeah.
I mean, again, in a culture seeped in misogyny, he radically empowers women. The first evangelist was a woman. Yeah. The person, the human being entrusted with possibly the most important message ever delivered to the human race, that Jesus had been raised from the dead, power of sin and death conquered. Who is entrusted with that message? It's a woman. It's Mary in the garden, not in the garden, at the tomb with the angel. And so it's radical, the empowerment. And of course, then you move into Paul's letters, and there are these tricky passages in Timothy and Corinthians, Ephesians, headship, etc. And we have to do the work. Yeah. And there is really reasonable argument to suggest that there is very specific context around those. Yeah. The second to last thing I want to say is that Paul, look at Paul. Lucy Peppiatt has written a brilliant book around Paul's women. But look at the book of Romans, for example. The letter to the Romans, arguably Paul's most masterpiece theology. That book of Romans was given to Phoebe to take to the Roman church. Yeah. And that role was hugely significant. Yeah. She wasn't like the post woman. Yeah. That was, again, a huge validation. She would preach the letter, unpack the message. She was the spokesperson, the communicator, essentially. Yeah. And Paul entrusts Phoebe. And so there are other women, leaders in the church that Paul entrusts. So all that to say, not only do I believe strongly historically God has called, equipped, empowering women to lead and to teach in his church. But this is so much more than, it's more than liberal feminism. It's totally different from liberal feminism. I would describe myself as sort of a Jesus-shaped feminist. But this isn't about grasping power back on the one hand. This isn't about women saying, right, we want the power back. You've had it for long enough. You've screwed it up. Right, we want it back. It's not that. But equally, it's not either, oh, let's give women a place at the table. It's about time. Oh, bless them. Yeah. Let's give them space at the table. No, to me, this is about restoring the Eden blueprint of men and women leading together in equality. And I'll say this slightly unfiltered, but we're seeing at the moment, aren't we, examples of male leadership, particularly men that lead very much sort of in an authoritarian sense, in an autocratic sense, in the church, and it's not always gone well. Yeah. And I wonder if there's something in men and women being able to lead in partnership together.
Leading alongside who can say, you're being an idiot, or watch this, or I think that's so good, the blueprint. But again, I guess hearing you share all that, you see this sense of calling to see freedom and empowerment.
I think there's a timing as well. The very, very last thing I'd say is I think we're in a time where God is raising up women in a specifically, which is why we've started the Orchard as a space to enable that to happen.
So just as we draw this podcast to an end.
He's giving me the shut up now.
So those three things, what are you passionate about? What are you gifted in? What do you think about? What do you dream about? What brings you alive? I always think of Eric Liddell, Chariots of Fire. When I run, I feel God's pleasure. For me, when I'm leading worship, when I'm seeing people encounter Christ, people come to Christ, that for me is that moment. So the passion thing. The second thing is
And of course, that won't necessarily be in the church. We've shared our story because
100%.
for us, those
Yeah.
calls have been within the church. But for most people,
It could
it'll be outside.
setting up a business, running a
Nursing
charity,
or-
teaching, education. But the second thing is, what do people recognize in you, on you, over you?
Validate, yeah.
And I think this thing around people speaking in over you is really important. I think there have been significant moments where key people have just spoken over me and reminded me of my identity and my call. And there's this family, in Namibia, there's this tribe. And when a woman becomes pregnant, they'll write a song over this baby growing in the mother's womb. And when the baby is born, the mother will sing this song, unique, special song over this person, about who they are, their name, their identity, over them. And then the people in the village learn this song and they'll sing it over that person. And then at key moments in the child's growing up, key moments along the journey, they'll sing this song over them. When a child is hurting, falls over, grazes its knee, or is troubled, they'll sing this song over them. When the child is naughty, misbehaves, they'll gather the village and they'll sing this song over them. This idea of this is who you are, this is your identity. This is what we see in you. And I when I heard that story, I found that so beautiful, because we at times need people around us to say, this is what I see in you. I think, to be honest, being really honest, the last 6 or so months has been really brutally hard for me and for us. And I think at times I've lost a bit of who I am, just got a bit confused, sort of not back. And just want to go, I was playing golf with my cousin Johnny, and he just began to speak, this is what I see in you, this is what you carry, this is who you are, this is, and even my dad, he just texted us, didn't he, like, this is what I see in you both. And we try and do that for each other. But for me, I feel the last week or two, I've just recaptured, actually, no, this is what God's put in me. This is my call. This is who I am. This is where I've got a bit distracted or lost. And I needed other people, like that village in Namibia, people singing over me. Of course, the Father of Heaven sings over us, identity, calling. But I think that's why I always worry when people run ahead on this is what my calling is, but it's in isolation.
Yeah.
And it's not birthed out of community, people who really know and love the person, who love enough to challenge and say, look, I'm not sure, or you're getting a bit distracted here. That's key. So what are you passionate about? What do people recognize in you? And then, of course, as we've talked about, the nuancing of what opportunities, what doors are God opening up, and the seasons of the doors may well open up, but at the moment you've got to be faithful behind the scenes of allowing God to cultivate these the strengths, the character, the skill that's required to outwork it.
And that calling is a journey.
A journey, brilliant.
Often, rather than a destination. And I think when we start to see calling as a destination, we miss the journey.
Yes.
And I think so much of calling is just outworked on the journey. So if you're working as a barista in Costa Coffee, or, if you're, I mean, that could be somebody's calling. I don't want to discount that.
Good coffee. But
it might be that that's not like, this wasn't what I was put on planet Earth to do. But it's still like, don't dismiss it. It could well be a part of this patchwork quilt that God is creating over your life.
And so as we end, if you're listening to this, I hear people here probably panicking.
Yeah.
I'm in my mid-30s and I still don't really know what I'm doing, or I see everyone else running and acing life and I'm not. Don't panic.
Yeah.
Don't panic. Reflect. What do you love doing? Ask people, what do you see in me? But God, he doesn't abandon us. He doesn't forget us. And I think this slightly myth that we all have one thing that we're going to do, and, that you've got to somehow discover it. If you're faithful to God, if you're birthed and connected in with a good community, I believe God will open up doors for you to do what you're put on earth to do. So Hope that's an encouragement. Thank you for listening.
Gosh, that's whizzed by, hasn't it?
Whizzed by.
Well, I hope it has
Felt
for
like you
other
only
people.
just got going as well on a few things.
I know. I'm thinking of all the things I wanted to say that I didn't say. But anyway, I'll save those.
There you go. Well, have a great, wherever you listen to this, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for more episodes coming up soon.